Good afternoon. My name is JunMo Kim. I'm from Miami House Church, shepherded by Shepherd Daniel Lee. I'm currently serving in the praise ministry, the All Nations Worship Service ministry, or preparation ministry, and the relational evangelism ministry. Today I'm honored to have the opportunity to share about my experience during the short-term mission trip to Madagascar. Before we left Madagascar, each team member was given a topic to prepare and present during our Tuesday meeting. Fortunately, or perhaps challengingly, depending on how one views it, I was assigned the topic of presenting the gospel. As I prepared, one particular verse stayed with me throughout the entire trip, Matthew 7:20-23. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, do we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. This passage came from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Jesus warns that there will be many who stand before him, convinced that their impressive works should grant them entrance in his kingdom. They will point to miracles performed, ministers led, and deeds done in his name as proof of their faith. Yet Jesus declares that such people have deceived themselves, believing that their actions were truly done for God, when in reality their hearts were far from him. I didn't want my experience in Madagascar to be driven by the wrong motives. If I feared serving in a way that appeared outwardly faithful, yet was inwardly disconnected from Christ. For that reason, the most urgent work that I needed to do before stepping onto the mission field wasn't logistical, but an examination of my own heart. It became a season of searching myself for the Lord, of asking whether I was truly walking in the faith, and whether my service would flow from genuine love for Christ, rather than from duty, pride, or desire to be seen. After sharing my presentation with the mission team, one question stayed with me and continued to challenge my heart: the gospel. More specifically, I wrestled with this thought: how are we able to share to the people of Madagascar about the good news in such a short time? Was it truly possible for us as visitors who would only be there for a brief moment in their lives to communicate something so deep, eternal, and life-changing? This question lingered with me, shaping the way I approached every day of the mission trip. On our second day in Madagascar, while we traveled to visit the Kani village for the first time, I began to feel very sick. As the van moved along the uneven roads, I tried to enjoy quietly, hoping not to draw any attention or concern from anyone. In that moment, all the reflections I'd carried with me, the desire to guard my heart, to serve with right motives, to hold onto the gospel, seemed to slip away. Instead, my mind filled with regret, I found myself thinking, maybe this short-term mission wasn't for me. How could I have thought that it was sensible for me to travel 35 hours to another country with such a sensitive stomach? Regrettably, as the motion sickness grew worse, a quiet fear began to form in my heart. I was no longer thinking about ministry or about sharing the gospel or even about the people we had come to serve. All I could focus on was trying to not get sick. My thoughts narrowed to a single goal: just make it through without vomiting. Yet despite the discomfort, the moment eventually arrived. The van stopped. It was time for our team to meet for the very first time the people whom the missionaries had been serving at the Kani Center, and to witness with our own eyes the conditions in which they lived. As we stepped off the bus, I sensed that whatever we were about to see would not leave us unchanged. When the metal doors finally creaked open and each team member stepped through the other side of that wall, I was still trying to steady myself, holding on to whatever strength I had left. But that moment I crossed the threshold, my feet touched the ground to the other side, something shifted inside me. Everything changed. The dizziness faded, the urge to vomit was gone. Instead, my mind was overwhelmed by what stood before me. The rusted sheets of metal that had been pieced together into shelters they called homes. The endless piles of rubbish they sifted through, hoping to find something, anything that they could clean and sell. The torn and weathered clothing hanging from their small frames, and the scraps of goods they gathered to make a meal for the day. It was heartbreaking. While other team members introduced themselves, spoke with locals, and embraced with children, all I could do was stand and watch, struggling to hold back tears gathering. I didn't know how to carry the weight of what I was seeing. Then for a brief moment, my eyes met the eyes of a young child. He gave me a quiet smile, gentle, warm, and so sincere, and I smiled back, but only for a moment, before I had to look away and pretend that everything was fine. In that moment, a new question pressed deeply upon my heart. If the greatest gift we carry is the good news, how could such a beautiful message be shared here? How could the gospel, the message that brings eternal life, take root in the hearts of people who might understand even the simplest words or images we use to explain? Later, as we sat for lunch with the missionaries, a deep and heavy burden settled in my heart. I couldn't stop thinking about the people we had met, and the questions that have been stirring within me since the moment we arrived. I long to understand how the gospel was shared in Madagascar, especially among those who lived with such hardships and so few resources. After wrestling silently with my own thoughts, I gathered the courage to ask the missionaries, Missionary Wendy, during your years serving in the land of Madagascar, have you witnessed anyone receive Jesus Christ? Have you seen any fruits? She listened quietly. The room grew still. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she finally began to share, and as we listened to both missionaries reflect on their years of labor, I was humbled. I realized painfully that I'd come to Madagascar thinking I understood how to share the gospel. I had studied evangelism. I had seen and used gospel tracts in relational evangelism. I watched countless apologetic videos. I read books, listened to podcasts about defending the faith. I believed that these tools, valuable as they were, would make sharing the gospel clear, structured, and effective here as well. But in that moment, I faced the truth. It was not simple. It wasn't easy. And I, despite all my preparation, didn't know what to do. Language barriers, cultural differences, unfamiliar worldviews, everything I thought I understood suddenly felt so inadequate. I felt lost, small, and underprepared before the reality of the mission field. I knew in my mind that nothing could stand as a barrier for the gospel. The power of Christ is not limited by language, education, or intellectual ability. Salvation doesn't depend on a person's capacity to reason, but on the grace of God who opens the heart. I believed this. But yet standing there, listening to the missionaries, seeing the hardships before my eyes, witnessing the depth of need, I found myself wrestling with the question I never truly confronted. If the gospel is for all people, what does Scripture say about those who can't fully understand in the ways that we are accustomed to explaining it? How does God work in places where our words and methods were so limited or seem so limited? I knew the answer had to be found not in my assumptions, but in the Word of God. As I continued to reflect, I came with the greater clarity that fruitfulness belongs to God alone. The Apostle Paul writes, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth, 1 Corinthians 6:3. This truth comforted me. The measure of a faithful servant is not found in the visible or impressive results, but in obedience. In serving with a pure heart, trusting that God will bring his fruits in his time. The seed planted in faith will bear a harvest, whether the one who plants it ever sees that harvest or not. This reflection also led me to think about my own church. I'm deeply blessed to be part of a congregation and I've seen remarkable spiritual fruit. But I'm always reminded that these blessings didn't appear overnight. The results of years, decades of prayers, tears, sacrifice, and faithfulness from our pastors, their wives, our shepherds, and their wives, and the old generation who labored when there was little to see. And we're now witnessing fruit that others sowed long before us. Before departing Madagascar, I spent a great deal of time reflecting on what it truly means for a Christian to be a witness. I recently read a book by Pastor John Mark Comer, and it challenged me deeply. It stirred in me a desire to live my faith as a witness of Christ's love, to be his light and his salt in every part of my life. And as the trip approached, I carried with me a question that I could not shake. What does it look like to be a witness in Madagascar? And during the 10 days we spent there, as I watched the missionaries serve with such patience and endurance, I began to understand more clearly what I had only grasped in theory. Through their lives, I learned what it meant to simply be a vessel for God's work. To an outside observer, the ministry of the Carney Center or the work done in Graceland might appear similar to any humanitarian effort, providing meals, cleaning the children, teaching them, and caring for their needs. But as I observed more closely, I realized it was far more than that. It was not just the works of their hands that stood out, but the heart behind it. A love shaped by Christ, a steadfastness sustained by prayer, and a hope rooted in the gospel. They're not serving merely to improve conditions, but to point towards an eternal kingdom. You are the light of the world, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on a stand and give it light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to the Father who is in heaven. Matthew 5:14-16. During the trip, and even after returning to Australia, I found myself saying this often. In my eyes, the missionaries were beautiful as they served the Lord. To me, they reflected what it meant to be a light of the world. It merely wasn't service, but love. A love that didn't come from human strength or compassion alone. It was a love that flowed from God himself. A love born from the truth that the Father gave his one and only Son. A love so great that it changed both the one who gives and the one who receives. This, I came to understand, is what it meant to be a witness. To others, the work may appear small or ordinary. It may not produce visible fruits within the time that the missionaries served them, but I was convinced that every act of care, every prayer spoken, every tear that was shed, and every meal given was under God's sovereign provision and eternal plan. That through this love, the children experienced something more than kindness. They encountered a truth written upon their hearts. There is a God, one God, who sent one man, Jesus Christ, for them. Once again, God humbled me in Madagascar. I spent so much time worrying about my ability to share the gospel effectively, whether I would have the right words, the right explanation, the right understanding. But as we visited a local Malagasy church and witnessed fellow believers worshiping in their own language, and as we saw teachers and co-workers pouring themselves out for the children, I came to understand and realize something more profound. God was already working in this land long before. I still vividly remember the worship at that church. There was only a small weathered keyboard and 3 microphones. The sound systems were simple, but the praise was so beautiful. Their voices filled the rooms with sincerity and joy. And I remember stepping outside, writing on my phone, God is alive, God is working in this place, and he's working in the land of Madagascar. And it was then I realized something unexpected. I've come to Madagascar believing that I was going to serve the people there, but in the end, the people of Madagascar taught me far more than I could ever offer them. As I continued to observe the missionaries and the love they poured out for the children, together with the work of former missionaries, teachers, and co-workers who had served at Akani and Graceland before them, I began to see something unmistakable. The gospel had already taken root in Madagascar, and it is still transforming lives. God has been equipping and using countless faithful people in this nation, or in that nation, each playing a part in the story far greater than what any of us could see. The children who are cared for in these ministries have been given a hope that didn't come from material security, but from God himself. A hope that flows from the love of Jesus. And even now, when I remember their faces, I miss them. To me, they were genuinely beautiful. Their clothes may have been torn and dirty. Some had washed in unclean water. Some bore ticks on their skins or wounds that had remained untreated for days, perhaps even months. Yet when I looked at them, they were so warm. Their small, precious eyes, their gesture of welcome, their laughter, and even their shyness held a sense of warmth. I realized that although we went to Madagascar hoping to help and serve these children, God used these very children, these co-workers and these missionaries to minister to me instead. Despite being unable to afford food or sleep in a comfortable bed or enjoy what many would consider a normal childhood, they didn't see themselves as disadvantaged. There was no bitterness, no resentment, only a purity and innocence that humbled me. In my eyes, they were blameless and pure, children of God without fault in this crooked and broken world. They were shining, and I missed them. Whenever I was around the children in Madagascar, one passage of scripture kept returning to my mind, though at first I couldn't really understand why. At the time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and placed a child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lower position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." Matthew 18, 1-5. These children in Madagascar had no social status, no legal document, no authority, no rights, and no access to education or stable work opportunities. They were in many ways entirely dependent on others to survive and to be protected. Much like children in the time of Matthew's gospel, who had no position in society beyond their complete reliance on others. Yet Jesus calls me to become like these little ones, to lay down my pride, my self-reliance, my claim to status, and to look to God as my only hope and provider. In many ways, these children lived that reality daily. They had so little, yet their hearts were so full. In my eyes, they were innocent in a way that the world could not corrupt. I remember a small moment. One child was eating food with their hands, and the food had left his hands dirty. For him, this was ordinary. After he finished, I reached out for a high five, smiling. But he stopped. He looked at me with those gentle, beautiful eyes and slowly showed me his hands. He was telling me without words that he didn't want my hands to be dirty. He had nothing, no clean water, no proper sanitation, or even a clean set of clothes. Yet in that moment, he thought of me above himself. And I realized that it was not his hands that were unclean, it was my heart. And it made me reflect on myself and how I'm called to love to love like this for my house church members, to love like this for my church, to love like this for the world that God so loves. As I thought of my life back in Australia, I realized how comfortable I've been. I saw how easily I relied on my own status, my education, my financial security, instead of relying on God. When I watched these children pray, many of them prayed as though they had nothing else to cling to. Their prayers looked so desperate, but also full of utter trust. It was a kind of dependence on God that was both confronting and beautiful. And in that moment, I saw myself more clearly. In my pride, I'd been living like the prophet Jonah, so sure of myself, so confident in my own strength, so certain that what I knew was enough. Pride is a struggle I still face, and I've often trusted more in my own knowledge about God than in God himself. But the land in Madagascar and the mission fields where the missionaries have labored showed me how futile my strength truly is. It made me reflect on my own ministry now, and the ministry I hope to lead one day as a shepherd. If I rely on my own abilities, my own training, or even my own theology, what good is it? How quickly it becomes empty. I was reminded of the words of God spoken through Isaiah. Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. Isaiah 1:13. In Isaiah's context, the offering were required by the law, yet they became detestable because they were offered without a heart truly devoted to God. That passage confronted me. I realized that if I serve with a heart focused only on myself and not on God, then my service, my ministry, my worship, my very offerings wouldn't be a pleasing aroma to the Lord, but something empty and meaningless. I'm not sure if many people knew the real reason why I wanted to join the Madagascar mission trip. For me, from the very beginning, the reason was very simple. I wanted to visit the missionaries. I didn't care where the mission field was, how difficult the travel would be, or how costly the journey might be. I felt compelled to see them. A few years ago, during singles camp, missionary Wendy shared a testimony about her ministry in the Carney Centre. Her words left a deep and unforgettable impact on me. I remember thinking one day, I want to go there. I want to see what God is doing. And when I heard that our church would be visiting Madagascar, I knew instantly that I needed to be part of that team. Before we departed, one of the team members presented on Paul's missionary journeys. As I listened, I was reminded of Paul's epistles, or letters, especially the opening. To travel across the nation in Paul's time was unimaginably difficult. Even today with planes, it's still challenging to visit believers across the world. Yet Paul fought to maintain fellowship across distances. And whenever I read the introduction of his letters, I find them beautiful. They reveal a spiritual bond far deeper than any human friendship, a bond built on Christ, uniting believers as children of God. Romans 1:8-12, Philippians 1:3-8, 1 Thessalonians 1:2-4, Colossians 1:3-6, Ephesians 1:15-18, Philemon 1:4-7, Romans 16:3-5. To me, this was the relationship, the love, the fellowship of the early church. This was the heart I longed to carry with me to Madagascar. And our team prayed that we might embody the warmth of house church so that the missionaries might experience the joy of spiritual family once again. They are far from home. They're far from communities where they first encountered God, from the leaders who discipled them, from those who saw their faith grow. We could only imagine how difficult that must have been for them. And so we wanted our time with them to echo that affection, that unity that we see in Paul's letters. And some people may have wondered why we ate mostly Korean food with the missionaries at their home. But for me, that was the whole point. It was not primarily about cuisine. It was about fellowship. It was about cooking for them, eating with them, and being nourished together in body and soul. As Pastor JunMo Kim explains in his book, this practice of eating and drinking with people far from God is what the New Testament writers call hospitality. It is the love of the stranger, not the hate or fear of the other. It's the act of welcoming the outside in, and in doing so, turning guests into neighbors and neighbors into family in God. This is what those meals became, a picture of spiritual familyhood. This unlikely group of people, different personalities, backgrounds, ages, cultures, and stages of faith, all gathered under Christ. It reminded me of Pastor Song's recent sermon about Noah's Ark. Both unclean and clean animals entered together. In the same way, to me, God brought us imperfect, different, and still growing into one spiritual household. There was warmth, there was joy, and I loved every moment. I went to Madagascar like a child. It was my first mission trip, and other than immigrating to Australia, it was my first time leaving the country, my first time catching an airplane. I was naive, I was still learning. I wanted to sit at the feet of everyone, to listen, watch, observe, and treasure every moment. And truly, some of the most precious moments were those simple moments of fellowship. Like missionary Wendy said when she shared that what she loved most was the praise. It was the simplicity of doing life together that I miss dearly. To me, in essence, it was house church. The simple act of doing life together, where God changes hearts through ordinary moments and where his presence quietly works. Throughout the trip, there was countless conversations about faith, struggles we were wrestling through, theological insights that we have been learning, reflections about mission, church, and the gospel. There was a shared zeal, a genuine heart for Christ and for his church. The experience made me rethink house church and my role within it. It reminded me of Paul's affection for the churches he wrote to, the deep spiritual bonds formed among believers. I began to pray that I might love and build up my house church in the same way, that we might grow into a family knit together, not by convenience, but by Christ. Growing up in this church, house church was simply a given. It was always there, and I never considered my Christian life could be any other way. But for the first time, through this mission team, I began to understand why many VIPs have shared when they encounter house church for the first time. The warmth I felt, the welcome, the care, the laughter, the prayers, was the same warmth that has led so many to stay, to return, and to eventually believe. It was a warmth of spiritual familyhood. With all this, one word remained, one truth that seemed to summarize the entire mission trip for me. I kept returning to the image of one soul, that my heart was drawn again and again to a night in Madagascar when this became clear. After a long day of ministry, 3 of us sat together late into the night. We spoke for 3, maybe 4 hours, but what we were witnessing in Madagascar, the spiritual reflections rising in our hearts, our struggles back home with the faith, and the questions we carried about house church ministry, it was during that conversation that something settled deeply within me. It's about that one soul, to leave the 99 in order to seek the one. I realized the most powerful way that I'd seen the gospel shared in Madagascar was not through strategies, programs, or perfectly structured explanations, but it was through fellowship, through the simple act of doing life together. And everything we did was just that. Eating with the missionaries, laughing with the children, listening to the teachers and co-workers, praying with one another, playing with the children on dusty grounds, worshipping. It was a spiritual fellowship, the kind that didn't need many words. And then when it was time to say goodbye, that truth became unmistakably real. Every hug from the teachers, the co-workers, the missionaries, and the children was so warm. Many of us could not communicate clearly in language, but the embrace we received from them said enough to find at home. It was not the kind of rest where one lies in bed for 16 hours, scrolling through a phone, numbing the mind with distractions, but instead it was a rest that came from being with Jesus while serving him. I found rest under the scorching sun of Graceland, playing with the children while the red dust clung to our feet and stained my white shirt. I found rest while sitting outside the missionary's home, listening to team members sing praise and speak as I looked over the water. I found rest in laughter, in prayer, in shared meals, in quiet moments, and in tears we try to hide when we said goodbye. I'm still learning how to find rest here in Australia, where distractions are plentiful and when the pace of life pulls my heart in 1,000 directions. To end, I want to say that the experience, the emotions, the grace, and the relationships formed in Madagascar are things I will never be able to truly and fully express with words. No testimony could ever capture the depth of what God allowed me to see and experience there. To the missionaries, to the teachers in Madagascar, to Dunji, and to the children, I miss you all. And to our church, thank you for sending us and for praying for us. Thank you for listening, and God bless.